I'd like to call to order the meeting of the May 16th, 2018 meeting of the San Francisco Elections Commission. It is 6:01 p.m. I'd also like to welcome our new commissioner, Charlotte Hill.
Thank you.
Welcome. Secretary Chan, if you'd call the roll.
President Donaldson.
Here.
Vice President Mogi.
Here.
Commissioner Hill.
Here.
Commissioner Judonic.
Here.
Commissioner Jung.
Here.
Commissioner Rowe is absent. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Next item.
Item 2, public comment on any issue within the Elections Commission's general jurisdiction that is not covered by another item on this agenda.
Seeing no members of the public coming forward, next item, please.
Item 3, open source voting. Discussion and possible action regarding the City and County of San Francisco's open source voting system project in 4 parts. A, Commissioner's Report. B, Technical Advisory Committee Report. C, Director's Report. D, Committee on Information Technology.
Okay. So, commissioners, we'll ask you if you have anything to report on open source voting and over the last since our last meeting 2 months ago.
So I have some things to report. So now try to go in chronological order if I can remember everything. So a few weekends ago, the California Clean Money Campaign, Trent, their executive director, spoke before us at the last commission meeting. They organized a kickoff rally for the open source voting project to build support for funding the project at the city level and also the state level. And they had a great event on a Sunday afternoon at the Women's Building in the Mission District. And there were about 125 members of the public that showed up. And I'm guessing 5 or 6 elected officials. It was a great event. A lot of people spoke in support. And I was there. I helped get some people to come, and lots of different groups spoke in support. And then there was a budget subcommittee hearing last week that I was invited to present by Supervisor Cohen. She called the hearing, and that was also very well attended. And I think Director Arntz will probably say a few words about that hearing. But Supervisor Cohen invited Director Arntz, Linda Jarrell, the Director of the Department of Technology, and also Slalom to give very short presentations, and then a number of members of the public spoke in support. And I also spoke before the City Democratic Club just to kind of educate them about open source voting to help build support. And I also spoke at an event this week on Monday that was in Palo Alto. It was organized by this group called the Northern California Grantmakers. It's a collection of groups that funds various democracy initiatives, and I educated them about open source voting, as a possible thing that foundations could fund. And I think that's about it. I know we have a TAC member here today that we can also, we'll get to that in Part B. But.
Thanks, Commissioner Judonic. And I also attended the California Clean Money kickoff for open source voting, as well as the hearing last, Friday? Of the Budget and Finance Subcommittee. I was very pleased to see the turnout, particularly for the Clean Money campaign in terms of the public, but also the political support, extremely important to moving this forward. So also there was an amount of money raised just in that room that day to help move forward and get more public support of $5,000 just right in that room, which I think shows a lot of commitment to this by the public. And anyways, I thought it was a great event. Also, there was lots of members of the public addressing the Budget and Finance Subcommittee, and though there was not actually, it was just a hearing for information, I thought that the review of the materials from the Slalom report, also the participation not only of Director Arntz, but also of Director, is it Gurwal? Jarrell, who's the IT director for development for the city and county of San Francisco. Having her there and talking to this was very, very valuable. So, we have the momentum. So I think but we need to stay on top of this and make sure that it still gets the right funding, et cetera, from the city and county. So, thank you.
There's a couple other things too I forgot to mention. So shortly after our meeting, this is 2 months ago, where we voted to, ask the mayor and the budget chair to fund the project, and also to send a letter to the state in support of the state matching funds. The San Francisco Examiner published an article about what happened at that meeting, and at that point, no one had offered to sign a letter in support. But then, after an expression of support to the mayor and Supervisor Cohen's office, Supervisor Cohen did decide to send a letter, and then the Examiner published a second article a few days later. But Mayor Farrell still did not commit to sending the letter to the state in support of the matching funds. And then the day of the campaign kickoff rally, President Breed announced that she would also send a letter. So that makes 2 officials from city government. And then I'll let Director Arns talk about the level of funding that COIT, but whenever we get to that item, but that has been committed by the city.
Very good. Any other commissioner reports? Okay, let's move on to the Technical Advisory Committee report. So, Commissioner Jurdonic.
Yeah, so we have member Carl Haig is here today. I think this is Carl's first time before the commission. So thank you, Carl. You can speak in the middle one.
Yeah. This one. Okay. Hi, I'm Carl Haig. I'm been a member of the Technical Advisory Committee on Open Source Voting. I'm an independent consultant software developer. I've been working with voting systems since 1996. I run a major website sponsored by the League of Women Voters, and about 100 volunteers and contributions from other people. So we support all the major counties in California, and working on that up through this coming election, and San Francisco is included. So I was able to get data from the San Francisco County Election Department and use that to support the website. But that's just a little introduction on me and my background. We're here to talk about the Technical Advisory Committee. So we've been making a lot of progress putting together our recommendations document. So one of the major things that we pretty much finished at this point is a set of key decisions that have to be made in terms of the implementation, and also a breakdown of different components. So our recommendation is, instead of just building one grand design and going and implementing that, we break up the project into a set of small pieces, which we can implement on a one-by-one basis incrementally. And also, that's in line with the philosophy of agile development, where you start off small and be able to make rapid improvements, do user testing, and grow it more organically. So some of the things that we're working on now are hashing out a lot of security-related issues, background into security, and some recommendations related to that. And we're also just starting some general recommendations in terms of the software development process and general requirements. So I guess you have a copy of our report that includes our current progress. Also, some of the recommendations that we've made in terms of having the city hire a technical lead to work on the project, and also what Chris just mentioned in terms of applying for matching grants with the state. So I'm here to answer any questions you have on the advisory committee.
And Carl is one of the committee's biggest contributors. He's been contributing a lot of text, so thank you, Carl. Carl, did you also want to mention that we've started to review Salam's report?
Oh, that's right. I forgot. We just, I guess as of the meeting before, the report just came out. So we just started analyzing discussing the contents of the report, and we'll be making, that'll be the subject of our deliberations the next upcoming meeting. So maybe after the next meeting we might have some response to that. But we are just starting to analyze the contents of that report.
Okay, good. Is there any, I guess if you're just analyzing that, I think that probably is what needs to be responded to. We'll get to the COIT item shortly, but I don't know if it sounds like it may be too early to say what sort of, in a response to such a report, would there be any, do you imagine there would be any recommendations around how to approach the project that would go beyond what's in the Slalom report? What's going to be the scope of that response? Or is that yet to be determined?
I think it has yet to be determined, but I think we'll go into more detail about what parts of it we think we agree with, or parts that we think maybe need some work, and how we see our recommendations matching up with what's in that report.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I would like to see something that helps to move something towards more action. And I think that report actually, it raised a lot of issues, not that they're unimportant issues, but certainly I think that something intact that said, because there are going to be issues, but to solve every possible problem before you start, particularly as mentioned in agile methodology, an approach to doing something rather than nothing, and also potentially a cascade approach or a big bang approach to the development process. I think a response to that would be, and a thought about that from TAC would be welcomed by this commission member.
Yeah, one thing I can say that's related to what's in the Slalom report is the experience with the star vote system from Austin, Texas. So in that, it's not really comparable to what we're proposing, in the sense that Star Vote was a group of academics that kind of got together and designed an ultimate new style voting methodology. And so they wrote up a whole detail, this is how it works and this is the project. And so then they just sent it out for a bid as one whole block. And so what our committee is recommending, and I think what is in the proposal, is to break the project up into individual components and develop them, and maybe even send out bids on a component by component basis. So the fact that you couldn't get anyone to bid on the whole complete system doesn't necessarily have an indication of how things would work in a more modular and agile development process.
And I would also ask that the TAC explore, or at least consider the idea of some sort of a hackathon kind of an approach to building some components, for example, things that would actually, again, help move things forward to some demonstrable result.
I think that's going to be happening, so.
Good.
Stay tuned. While Carl is up here, I also want to say that Supervisor Cohen, after my presentation, one of the questions she asked me was, how can the TAC help the city and the Department of Technology, the Department of Elections? And I said that, we're eager to help, but no one's really directly come forward, asking us for help. But we've been proactive.
Great. Thank you. Commissioners, any other questions? Thank you. Director's report on open source project.
Yeah, so regarding the funding, so COIT allocated $300,000 to scoping out the open source voting system, and then in a combination with the $300,000 would be the $125,000. This is all my director's report too, so it's nothing new. $125,000 from last fiscal year that we didn't use to hire to fill the FDE 1823 position. So there's $425,000 available for fiscal year 1819, which will be attached to in some form or fashion, I don't know the exact breakdown, to the RFP that Department of Technology and probably the director, Jarrell, will be drafting to identify the technical resources to organize the specifications for developing an open source voting system, so the city can get more specified costs around such development. But at this time, since last week, Director Jarrell hasn't started drafting the RFP. I can't give any updates on anything that's going into it. But right now, there's $425,000 that would be available to the scoping out of the system. So.
Is the scoping of the system, and is this entirely an initiative of COIT? They're the ones who've made this decision. Was it partly your decision? What was the decision to pursue some smaller, rather less substantial effort in the next fiscal year versus what I think that some of us would desire and anticipated?
Yeah. So COIT. So after the department and Department of Technology submitted the application to COIT. The application requested $960,000 to attribute to an open source development project for a voting system, and COIT instead allocated $300,000. And the reasoning that COIT provided for the allocation of $300,000 versus $960,000 was that COIT thought, after speaking and meeting with Slalom and also other stakeholders, that $300,000 was a sufficient amount for the scoping out phase of developing a voting system. So.
And do we know yet what the objective of that's going to be when we say scoping out? I mean, I think that I have been disappointed that we have not actually more aggressively pursued the actual building of some sort of a system. And sure, having the business, I don't think the slalom was a waste of money, but I do think it is. And this amount of investment will potentially risk actual delivery of an open source system by starving it, the project itself. And so if nothing else, I think we'd like to make sure, I would like to know that this is going to be something the outcome of which is going to lead to something yet more with, let's say, greater inertia in the direction of delivering something. So to what extent, Director Arntz, do you have input to what the objective of that would be? And to what extent do you believe that that will move things forward to actually building something that can be delivered in the following fiscal year?
Well, my understanding is that the city obtaining the technical resources to set some specifications for a system will allow the city to actually start setting more certain costs around the development of a system, which right now the Slalom report provided a good understanding, like a broad understanding of what would go into building a voting system. But the Slalom report wasn't meant to provide specifics on a voting system. So, and it was clearly stated in the business case as well that it wasn't really there to set the specifications. So the city is now taking what's in the Slalom report, has a better sense of what would it take to develop a voting system. Then ideally through the next step, the city can create more specific requirements and scoping of what it would take, not just of the actual operation and development of the voting system, but the maintenance and ongoing care, and start setting some numbers around that so the city can start projecting how to proceed. So that part has been stated, that part I know, but as far as what will happen next, I don't know that. But the next step would be to scope it out and to set some standards for the city to make some decisions around.
So I have a few questions, and some of these I know the answer to, but I just wanted to, so the public can hear. But so is the plan that's being described, does it involve hiring a staff person that would lead the project, or like who would be managing the contractor?
My understanding would be the Department of Technology that would be managing in some form or fashion the contractor, since DT is issuing the RFP, and it's a technical project. I mean, the department, as much as we can, will provide information regarding elections. We don't know voting systems ourselves. We operate one, But DT would be the department that would, I guess, host or organize the contractor, especially initially in the process.
And do you know if they're going to be having a dedicated resource, or would it be, yeah?
I think so. I mean, I haven't seen the RFP. I mean, so.
I meant the in-house staff person that's.
Well, that I don't know. Yeah, I did earlier. I thought that Department of Technology had a project manager to attribute to the project. I don't know if that's still available or not. And also Director Jarrell's indicated she's happy to come to the commission and answer any questions. And it's probably best that she could speak on these matters than me speak for her. But as far as any Department of Technology personnel, I can't speak on that.
And then in terms of the quote unquote speccing out is, of course, one of the things we recommended at the last meeting was this idea of doing it in stages more incrementally. And is the speccing out, is that the entire system, or are they open to the idea of speccing out smaller portions so we could start earlier?
Again, I can't. That's not something that I can speak on. I mean, I think Director Jarrell, as you saw in the presentation, there's a lot of choices to make, just on basics on how the system would operate, much to get to the development contemplation of developing a voting system. So, I think I'd let her answer those questions before I put words in her mouth.
Okay, and then in terms of having someone that can speak to these issues, is that something that, would we be able to get a commitment for someone to be here at each meeting, or how do you think that should work?
Say again?
Do you think we would be able to get a commitment from them that someone would be able to be here at each commission meeting, or?
I can't speak for them, yeah.
Okay. And then also, do you know, so I know that COIT has recommended the $300,000 for next year, but that's just a recommendation to the mayor's office. And do you know, so the mayor could potentially put in more, the supervisors could put in more. And have you had any interaction with the mayor's office to know whether they're considering putting in more?
No, I don't think, I don't have the impression that more will be added to the department's budget generally, and to anything at this point, since the mayor's office already introduced, or it's already moved the budget over to the board. So I wouldn't expect the mayor's office to add more funding at this point. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but my expectation is that more funding would not be made available.
Okay, and then the last question is, this is also something I mentioned to beforehand, but one of the things that the TAC members were interested in, we actually voted on, was the idea, and this relates to your point about making some concrete progress, but they were interested in having access to a precinct's worth of ballot cards, or 100 ballot cards, just to kind of potentially, if you want to experiment with building a scanner. And then you were going to look into whether that might be possible. Yeah,
so I would not provide ballots to TAC.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, so we were talking after I met with you today on whether what that would mean, what we would do to provide the images to TAC so they could take a look at those. So yeah, I'm not against it. Just got to figure out. I want to make sure that let me just think it through and let it. It'd be certainly after the election is certified. It would not occur, and after the period of any potential recount could occur. So. Yeah, so potentially, we have to work through that still.
Yeah, it'd be much appreciated. Okay, thank you.
I have a couple of questions, and these directed to my fellow commissioners. So, President Donaldson, since Director Jarrell has expressed an openness to coming to this commission to address some of these questions, would you be open to extending a formal invitation, perhaps for the next meeting?
Yes, very much so.
And Commissioner Jordanek, in advance of the next commission meeting, I wonder if TAC would be willing to develop and I know you all have already been talking about this, but develop a a set of principles that you might convey to Director Jarrell about developing these components in smaller pieces.
Yeah, so certainly, and actually, she did attend one of our meetings, and it may have been the meeting where we discussed this very issue. And I know that she has received the letter that the commission supported that outlines some of these things at a higher level, but we can even get more detailed, I think. I've reached out to her at least on an individual basis to let her know that I'd be happy to meet with her.
Mm-hmm.
But so yeah.
But it might be worth, if she does decide to join us at the next meeting, it might be worth walking her through it.
Yes, I'll plan to do that.
Yep, absolutely. Took the words from my mouth. Thanks for suggesting it, Commissioner Jones. Commissioners, other questions, comments? I think one last thing, Director Arntz, that I'm thinking about as we look forward and think about SB 450, and we talk about this component aspect. I'm sure that, it's a couple years away. You're mostly focused on June right now, but as we look at that, what input do you think that will have into what, again, component approach, having some sort of central scanner seems like that would make sense, but I'm just, I guess, as I'm thinking out loud here, really it goes to what the relationship would be of you as the Director of Elections to the IT department and what the roles would be. And maybe you don't have to answer that now unless you have some thoughts on it, but that I think becomes very key to whether, I think, one, what kind of information we're going to get. It's great that Director or CIO Jarrell is willing to come here, but certainly we're here with you every meeting. So I don't know if you have any comments on that. There wasn't a question in there if you were wondering. Exactly. Sort of, I guess it's speculation as to how SB 450 might affect this and whether that might accelerate or help us narrow the focus to something that could be more doable faster. And then the second question would be, what would be the role of the CIO's office or the mayor's office with the Director of Elections in this approach?
So going to voting centers, going to all vote by mail essentially, then having the voting centers, that's a big change, and so certainly the city would have to be involved at the board and the mayor's office, and then certainly the public would have to have comment as well. So the lead time for that is long. It's not a short lead time.
Sure.
So and really my preference to go to vote to an all vote by mail and vote center model would be in 2022, not 2020. I think that it's a quick turnaround. We've got the next Dominion system coming in 2019. You've got a March primary. So essentially we'll be running the November 2019 election and prepping for the March primary election, and then to run that, then run into a vote center model with all vote by mail for even March or November, to me is pretty quick. And also I'd like for the city to benefit from the lessons learned of other jurisdictions. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to look at 2022 as being the point where if the city were to make a change, this is just my thinking out loud, but I think 22 gives us time to have that conversation, get a sense of the costs, and also have the public input, because polling places are much loved in San Francisco, and just for any of us to make a decision that we're going to not even have one polling place often causes a lot of consternation. So to remove all polling places, I think will require some time and some outreach and some input. As far as the bifurcation or the input by departments of election and technology, certainly the Department of Technology will have input and also some tasks to achieve, because to make the voting center model successful, there has to be a live connection into the registration database, and so you have to have a secure connection from 50 sites throughout the city in some form or fashion. How that looks, I don't know. So that to me is one of the main inputs we'll have from Department of Technology on the vote center model. The other components, I think the department probably could implement if it's not a vendor, then a contractor, to implement and then support the system for the voters to use at the vote centers, also with whatever model we're using for the tallying of the vote by mail ballots. So yeah.
And the question on like the relationship, if CAO Giroux is taking on more of a role to develop this, I presume you work with her today, right, in some fashion from a system standpoint, or her group.
Yeah, so I mean, on the technical side, that's her area. So I really, there's not much, we don't have much input there. There's not much we can do to support that. We can describe our experiences about operating voting systems, but we don't have experience in how voting systems operate. So from a process standpoint, yeah, we'll definitely have input. We can provide information on how we've experienced the voting systems we've used in the recent past. And then, and I think there's going to have to be a lot of conversation and looking into existing systems too, to see what they offer and see what, if the city were to continue developing its own voting system, if you look at really look at the marketplace and see what's out there and see what the city could bring into its own system. So yeah, and this is one thing too, I've said here, and I've certainly said it in meetings, it's not just, the Department of Elections or Department of Technology creating a voting system. It's the city has to develop a voting system. This has to be a city project that has a very broad spectrum of input and support. LA has got a very large pool of people that are contributing on many committees and have many roles in developing a voting system. That might be too large. Last time they've got like 50-some people that are involved in some committee or some advisory board or whatever. It's probably too big, but at the same time, I think the controller's office has to be involved in this. I think the mayor's office has got to be at the table. It can't just be Department of Technology and Department of Elections drafting RFPs and issuing them, and it has to be a citywide effort. So. And the same thing with what goes into the voting system. It's not just what happens here or DT, but the city certainly has to have input as well.
And when you say citywide effort, what can you elaborate on that a bit?
Well, yeah, like the funding, for instance. Certainly the mayor's office, has the authority to allocate funds to a project like this, but also the board. The board has done well, and they passed the resolution, but the board hasn't come forward with funds.
Right.
That's the truth. The controller's office will have to consider the funds to develop a voting system in the city's annual fiscal year budgets and project that out going forward. And that's why the specifications or costs are so important. I realize people think that's a delay tactic for the city not to do anything, but for the controller even to project what the impact of developing a voting system would have going forward on the city's fiscal year budgets, he would need some realistic numbers that he can plug into his planning. So it's a broad effort. There's going to be a lot of input, and it's not just DT, it's not just the Department of Elections, but certainly the original question, whatever input we have as far as our experience in operating voting systems in the election processes, we'll give that input.
Yeah, I would think it certainly has to do with requirements and how you actually want to run elections and what things you are constricted by with existing equipment and what you'd like to do better. Audits, for example, perhaps, those kinds of things, be able to recount and much more. Anyways, we're getting probably too deep into this for the moment, and we'll have an opportunity to, it sounds like, speak with Director Gerald. Any other questions, commissioners, on this item? Well, we still have one more COIT, the COIT discussion. And so I'll just move on to that briefly. I don't want to go into a lot of detail here other than to say that we have included documents here around what the funding request was. As Director Arntz mentioned, the request went in for $960,000 for the next fiscal year. What was actually agreed, was it 310 or was it 300 even? I can't
300.
remember. 300 even? Okay. And then the $125,000 for to hire a project leader within the Department of Elections is combined with that to get the $425 for the next fiscal year. This also includes a presentation that is a summary of the Solemn report and has some funding profiles in it as well. And so this actually was, I believe, what was presented last Friday, not necessarily at COIT. So we put it in as the COIT item. But I just want to point that out, so it's for your review. Whether or not you've read the full Slalom report, this I think is a good summary.
So pages 1 to and 6 and 7, I believe, were what Slalom presented at COIT.
Okay.
Then the remaining was provided, the combination with the other remaining content was provided at the budget subcommittee hearing it was Thursday.
Okay.
So.
Yep. So I think that I wanted to make sure that this was part of our records here as well, along with the Slalom report, and that's so I just wanted to include it here. So I don't know if any of the commissioners have any comments or questions on that. Okay.
Yeah, I do have a question. Coming back to this conversation around speccing out the open source voting system, the Slalom report explicitly says on page 1 that their assessment does not intend to be a detailed design document for a voting system. Would you say that scoping or speccing process is intended to create that detailed design document? Is that a fair thing to say?
Almost. I don't see, and I think that's the worry that the commissioners have. That I think that the next thing that happens is a more specified statement of information regarding what the system would look like, what it would do, how it's built. But then you have this technical advisory committee that the Elections Commission has put together, and they're getting more into the technical details of a potential system. I don't think that the next document will go that far, and it may not have to go that far, really, to provide a scope of work and to provide a sense of cost.
So then, just to clarify, and maybe this is best for Commissioner Jordanek, is the Technical Advisory Committee tasked with creating a detailed design document for a voting system? Is there anyone who's been explicitly tasked with creating that?
No, and that would be too much work for the time that we were able to spend. But we're doing more high level guidance, and in some cases more low level. But it would be too much work for us to do that.
Okay, so this would be something that would be developed after the broader scoping project, probably by whoever is hired to staff this work.
Probably a consult, probably be a
Yeah.
contractor. I don't think it's going to be staff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Public comment on this item?
Good evening, my name is Jim Soper of the Voting Rights Task Force. Just briefly, it was announced or got in the papers last Friday that the state has a $9 billion surplus in its budget. And we're asking them to come up with $8 million. That is less than 1/1000th of the surplus. And if you're talking to people, I would point that out because it is tiny. We better get it this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is David Carey. The principal barriers to implementing your policy on open source voting systems are not issues of technology or funding. Instead, they are fundamentally management issues about people and organization, motivation and coordination, performance and accountability. This is your policy, and ultimate accountability for achieving it is yours and yours alone. You can delegate, share, contract, or partner some of the responsibilities with others, but that ultimate accountability is only yours, neglected or not. The progress for the last 2.5 years has been abysmal. except for your Technical Advisory Committee. Unfortunately, it seems unlikely that their commendable efforts can scale to what is needed to really get this project moving. You need to more effectively and collectively assert yourselves and reclaim the independence that you are supposed to have and provide to the Department of Elections. I've withheld my final assessment of the Slalom report, holding out hope that some of my submitted written inquiries about it would be addressed. But lacking that, my tentative conclusions about the report are quite unfavorable. To briefly summarize, many of its estimates are empty, vacuous, and detached from an application to San Francisco. Some of its estimates are clearly excessive or even absurd. The report didn't even offer estimates for its most highly recommended procurement option. The report fails to identify what is probably the biggest risk factor. Its recommendations for project planning fail to identify how a truly agile project could be accomplished. The influences of people who would like to see this project die or be sidelined are all over the report. You haven't been asking enough questions about it. My understanding, based on the commission hearings in early 2017, was that this report was supposed to accomplish two things: determine how much it would cost to develop and implement an open source voting system, and specify how that process would be conducted, or at least the specifics of the next steps. From what I've seen so far, including this year's request to COIT, the report has failed badly on both accounts. I encourage you to make a similar assessment and reject the report, because it fails to meet both your expectations and the needs of your project and your policy. You can and should reject the report without first assessing any specific accountability to any person or group of people. The report should not be relied upon by you or others to guide your project forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carey.
Hello, my name is Brent Turner, California Association of Voting Officials, and we want to welcome Commissioner Hill.
Thank you.
This crucial moment in American history, and as you probably know, we've been fighting for democracy here in San Francisco County with this election system technology issue and leading the country, standing on the shoulders of folks like Medgar Evers, as well as more recently Alan Deckert with Open Voting Consortium, who's known as the father of this particular work. The interesting part of this conversation is, and there was lots for the public to comment on, but due to the length of the presentation, I'll be brief and just partial, but all this work is already done. So there's already open source voting systems operating in New Hampshire, and we've demonstrated these systems since 2004. So it's not like it's some mystical goal to be achieved. It's a little confusing here, and there's lots to be discovered and considered. But basically, when the Slalom report cites the Texas project and the LA project, those are already failed projects, and we told them that before they even started doing the report. So the fact that they didn't speak to the real open source pioneers, but rather spoke to the people that were in charge of the failed projects after being told that those were failed projects, I think we want our money back as a county from Slalom. And I think we need to just proceed with the Department of Elections on board, the Department of Technology on board, and understand that this is not rocket science. This is simple stuff. All it takes is starting the project, which is simply accomplished, and then we'll finish it as soon as possible. In having a conference call with former CIA Director Jim Woolsey, speaking to the Department of Homeland Security last week, it was fairly clear in the words of the intelligence authorities that if we don't get these secret software, corporate-owned voting systems out of deployment immediately, we are handing our democracy over to Russia, known enemies and unknown enemies. So it's not like we can just have this conversation casually and announce there's no money for this. That can't happen. The eyes of the nation are on this project. We've been working on this now for over 15 years, and the experts are available to consult on this. It's just a matter of political will. We need to move this forward immediately. Thank you all for your interest
Thank
in
you,
this.
Mr.
and
Turner.
welcome to the commission. Thank you.
Seeing no further public comment, let's move on to the next item.
Item 4, Open Source Technical Advisory Committee. Discussion and possible action on committee membership.
Commissioner Judonic?
Yes, so this is an item that I asked to be on the agenda, and this there are 2 pages that are in the binder. It looks like this. It's the spreadsheet chart. So basically, we have 5 members on the committee, and my term ended last April, and I think our bylaws say that we have 3 months holdover, and then the other members, their terms are over in 2 days. And so I would like to ask the commission to reappoint myself as the chair. And then I did speak with all of the committee members, and all but one of them would like to, are interested in continuing. And I would like to, I'm hoping that the commission will reappoint those 3 members, and I would also like the commission to authorize me to open an application period for the 1 vacancy we have. So the person that is does not want to continue on, it's Larry Bafundo, and if you look on the attendance record on the back of the first page, you can see that he's missed a lot of the last meetings, and that's not really his fault. He his work has forced him to travel out of state, and so he's had to miss a lot of meetings because of that, and that's going to continue. So if the commission is okay with reappointing the membership, it would be Larry Bafundo's seat that would I could open an application period for, and kind of do a similar process that we did last year. And then just as a reminder, I included the bios so you can see who the members are and what their qualifications were. But I'm very happy with the 3 members who are staying on. They've all been contributing and attending the meetings, and we're still in progress, and there's more for us to do.
So, Commissioner Judonic, are you asking, let me see if I got it. So we're reappointing reappointing you as chair, reappointing the remaining members other than Larry Bafundo, and then a third one is to open up that seat to applications.
Yeah, to authorize me to kind of post an application period. And then I would, like we did last year, I could come back to the commission with the information about the applicants and then a recommendation, and we could vote. That's just what I was suggesting, but
No, that's great. I would actually, I think it's easiest if we just have each as a separate motion for discussion purposes, if any. So do I have a motion about reappointing the chair for the TAC, Chris Judonic?
Can I ask a question first? I mean, I assume this is the case, but shouldn't the TAC appoint the chair?
well, so I don't have a copy of the bylaws, but the bylaws that we passed last year say that the meetings should be chaired by the commissioner.
Oh, I see.
So that's kind of locked in.
That would be you.
Yeah, and I'm happy to do that.
Unless
Or
we have
whoever
other
we appoint.
commissioners that would be interested in.
True. Allow me to make that motion then.
I should say, so the vice chair is appointed by the membership, and there was one meeting I wasn't there, so for one meeting I wasn't the chair.
So Commissioner Jung, are you offering a motion?
I make that motion to appoint Chris Jordanic as the TAC chair.
Second.
Secretary Chan, would you call the roll?
We have to do public.
Oh, public comment, excuse me. Yes, thank you. Any public comment on this item?
Brent Turner with Cavo, we think Commissioner Jordanic makes a fine chair.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Seeing no further public comment, Secretary Chan, would you call the roll?
On the motion, President Donaldson.
Yes.
Donaldson, yes. Vice President Mogi.
Yes.
Mogi, yes. Commissioner Hill.
Yes.
Commissioner Hill, yes. Commissioner Judonic.
Yes.
Judonic, yes. Commissioner Jung.
Yes.
Young, yes. Vote is unanimous. Motion carries.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So another motion, looking for another motion regarding Carl Haig, Rowan Katau, and Tony Wasserman, and reappointment to another. What is the period that is being requested? Is it a
1
year?
year.
1 year.
1 year.
1 year from let's see, the 18th, or 1 year from this appointment date.
Well, how about if we say 1 year from the dates listed here? I think that,
Okay.
or we could have them all begin to, well,
Clarify that? I'm not
yeah, let's
sure.
clarify that.
So should we just
you-
set a date, through and including May 18, 2019 as
That
the
might be
term
the
for
easiest thing to do.
reappointment of all of
Yes.
these continuing members? Carl Haig, Roan Katau, and Tony Wasserman.
Yes.
So I guess there is an ambiguity though. So should my term also be the May instead of the odd one out, or?
Perhaps we should go back and reconsider the first motion so that it is specific.
So the bylaws provide that your terms are on the day of selection, so that would be today.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you, Andrew.
We don't need to. Thank you very much. Yes. Okay. Do I have then a motion to extend for a period of 1 year the appointment or reappointment of Carl Haig, Rowan Katau, and Tony Wasserman?
My motion.
You have a second?
I'll second.
Any public comment? Seeing no member of the public coming forward, Commissioner Chan, would you call for the vote, please?
President Donaldson.
Yes.
Donaldson, yes. Vice President Mogi.
Yes.
Mogi, yes. Commissioner Hill.
Yes.
Hill, yes. Commissioner Giordani.
Yes.
Giordani, yes. Commissioner Young.
Yes.
Young, yes. The vote is unanimous. Motion carries.
Okay, very good. So the final item was for an open seat, as Larry Profundo was not seeking reappointment. And so the request from Commissioner Giordanic was to open this seat for an application period of, till the next meeting, I guess?
Yeah, I would say I would aim for at least 2 or 3 weeks. I would try to get it done before the next meeting, if I can.
You want to put a date on it?
Well, I mean, the only thing is,
Until filled is fine too.
yeah, I mean, I'll just try to get it as soon as I can, but I can't make any promises, that's all.
Okay, and the condition is that this, the person selected or recommended would come back to the commission for the actual appointment, is that correct?
Yes, and Larry can continue serving for 3 months after his,
Oh,
yes.
okay, very good. So I guess then the motion would have to do with opening this for an application, without an end date until someone is actually recommended and then appointed for that seat.
I have a clarifying question. So I recall last time the applicants, the ones that all applied, we did kind of didn't we look through them and then we voted
On each separately.
So is this different? I heard that you're going to make a recommendation and bring that person to come here. So does that mean you're going to select that one member?
Oh, well, I'll do it like I did last year, which is I'll bring the information about all the applicants and then encourage all the applicants to come, and then, but I can anticipate maybe having a recommendation of the 1 or 2 people I think are the best, I guess. But-
Okay.
So we would be choosing.
And we would still be making the appointment, yes, but thank you for clarifying the process, Commissioner Moji. Okay. So do I have a motion to open this seat to an application, for applications?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Public comment? Seeing none. Secretary Chan, please call for the vote.
President Donaldson?
Yes?
Donaldson, yes. Vice President Mogi?
Yes.
Mogi, yes. Commissioner Hill?
Yes.
Hill, yes. Commissioner Giordani?
Yes.
Giordani, yes. Commissioner Young?
Yes.
Young, yes. Vote of 6-0, unanimous, motion carries.
So when the position is posted, I'll let the commission know by email, and then you can circulate to anyone that you think might be interested in.
Great. Thank you.
5-0. 5-0. Just the vote count, for the record.
I'm sorry.
we miss one?
5 here? Oh, I'm sorry. I keep saying 5. My correction. Thank you.
Next item?
Item 5, approval of minutes of previous meeting. Discussion and possible action to approve minutes for the March 21st, 2018 Elections Commission meeting.
So on this item, I just want to point out that we do have something in our, beyond the minutes themselves from a member of the public, from Mr. Carey, regarding some alternative language for some items. I have started to listen to double check what he had written in these areas, and I believe that they are things that we should properly record into the minutes. And so I would not be in favor of passing this as written, and that incorporating this as just directly from what Mr. Carey wrote, having not verified the audio, I would not be comfortable with a motion personally that would include that. However, that would be my take. So,
I mean, I've known David Carey for a while, and I would trust. I would trust what he's typed here. So I would be totally happy with adopting the minutes with his changes.
okay.
If we could always go back and edit it if there were some inaccuracy, but I would trust.
Is that a motion, Commissioner Judonic?
Yes. So I will move that we adopt the minutes with incorporating Mr. Carey's changes, as well as there's a typo. It should be Alec Bash with a C, A-L-E-C, on the last page at the bottom.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Public comment?
Thank you, Commissioners. I just wanted to say that I don't typically look through your minutes and double check them, but I felt like your last meeting was a particularly important one for your open source voting project, and it was something that I think there were only 4 commissioners there. So, and there were some, I think, reviewing there was some good questioning about the Solemn report, and I just thought in general, I thought the minutes really did a good job of covering most of that. But there were a few areas where I thought there were some important points that it would be, even though we've got the audio out on YouTube, that it would be helpful to kind of condense some of those key points in the minutes themselves. Thank you.
Mr. Carey, I have a question for you.
Yes.
So you said, and this is related to the discussion of the Slalom report, you said that accountability is ours and ours alone, and this issue is one of people, organization, performance, and accountability. So, specifically within the scope of what we can do as a commission, what should we be doing that we are not doing?
I think you'd be asking more questions. I went to the Finance and Budget Subcommittee hearing on Thursday, and I was really impressed with some of the insightful, probing, challenging questions that Supervisor Cohen was asking people, kind of making sure that they were keeping on their toes. There are questions I think you could have asked tonight about both the COIT application and particularly the COIT application, maybe even the Solemn report that might have been more informative for you. And you do have an item later here about future topics that I have a list of items I think that might be helpful for you to discuss that I can talk about then. So.
Thank you, Mr. Carey, and thank you for listening to the audio and providing your input.
Brent Turner with California Association of Voting Officials. Just for the future, when we talk about the agenda and minutes, there may be some thought as to breaking the public comment if there's going to be 4 items under the open source voting, maybe inserting a public comment after the first couple, because it becomes so voluminous, it's really difficult to keep track of everything. Just a suggestion. The other thing was to piggyback on what Mr. Carey is saying. I think part of the issue is you're just so all darn likable, and people don't really want to be overly forward about the grave nature of some of this. Mr. Carey's initial comments we want to associate with. His last comment, in my opinion, goes a little too softly because of the intensity of this issue. When Slalom does we read the Slalom report in 5 minutes and gave it an F and sent that grade of F to all the supervisors and started mentioning we should get our money back. It's obvious that they were speaking with the open source election technologist group, and we've stated with repetition, that's Mitch Kapoor and a bunch of folks out of the proprietary world. When you're talking about these issues, you want to stick close to the real pioneers that come out of the world of open source. When you start referring to nouveau groups or groups that, what we say, suffer from the Rosie Ruiz complex, which is the marathon runner that took the subway and then crashed through the victory tape, and lay claim to open source. You just got to make sure when you're talking about these nuancey licensing issues and the rest of it, that you're sticking close to the real folks that know what they're talking about. That would either be Department of Defense and the people behind them, who I'm glad to give as contact information, or the Air Force, or NASA, or somebody that has worked with this, or the state of New Hampshire to a certain degree. Again, Dr. Juan Gilbert, Brian Fox. These are the folks that know about these issues, and when Slalom is told about how to proceed with the utmost care, and they ignore that, and then come up with a report like this, I think Supervisor Cohen was appropriate in probing further, and I think we should make sure that we're paying close attention at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Okay, having had public comment, I do just want to mention, I know the audio was also very difficult because we were in a different room, and so I want to acknowledge that Secretary Chan generally does an excellent job of putting together very detailed minutes. So, in any case, at this point, if there's no further comment, then I will call for a vote.
President Donaldson?
No.
Donaldson, no. Vice President Mogi?
Yes.
Mogi, yes. Commissioner Hill?
Yes.
Commissioner Hill, yes. Commissioner Jadonic?
Yes.
Jadonic, yes. Commissioner Jung?
Yes.
Jung, yes. Vote of 4 to 1. Vote passes. So the motion carries.
Next item.
Item 6, Commissioners' reports. Commissioners' reports. Oh, I'm sorry. Item 6, Commissioners' reports. Commissioner reports on topics not covered by another item on this agenda, meetings with public officials, oversight and observation activities, long-range planning for commission activities, and areas of study, proposed legislation which affects elections.
Could I request for our audience that somebody change this screen so that they can see the next page of the agenda?
Let me push that.
Oh.
Got it. There we go. Very good.
Thank you.
And we want to point out that we did unfortunately have 2 number 5s.
Sorry, I apologize for that.
My mistake. I gave that to Secretary Chan, I believe, that way. In any case, Commissioner, any further reports, anything you'd like to add?
President Donaldson, I don't know if you want to make the announcement about the open seat now or about Commissioner Savant
Sure.
in this one, but
Yes.
if you would like to.
Sure. Well, Commissioner Safant has resigned from the commission, so we do have an open seat for the treasurer's seat. Unfortunately, due to some family issues, and so she was saddened that I'm saddened that she cannot be on the commission anymore. So that seat is now open. Any other commissioner reports?
Yeah, I'll just say quickly that I signed up to be a polling place inspector like I usually do. And so I'm looking forward to that. There's a couple emails I got from a member of the public regarding the election, but I'll hold that off until number 6, just because it relates more to the report on the
Director's
election.
reports. Yep.
Which, oh, you mean 7? Or 6, that's indicated, sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
unadjusted 6.
Let's call this item 5B for now.
I will note when I was appointed by the Board of Education that they specifically asked that not only that I report back to them once a year on the workings of this commission, but also that we as a group become more involved in communicating with high school students throughout San Francisco about local elections. We didn't go into any detail on what that might look like, but I understand there's an appetite at the Board of Education for us to be more involved with local students and encouraging them to vote. I am happy to take the lead on communicating with them further to understand whether they have specific ideas of how we could do that. And I'm also eager to hear from the Department of Elections about what we are doing so far and kind of learn what opportunities there might be to do even more.
Great.
I was wondering if I could ask as part of my commissioner report, and I'm not sure whether, well, maybe this would be a question directed to the deputy city attorney. A couple of the comments spoke, and I'm not sure whether they were being rhetorical or not, about getting our money back from this solemn report. Question, one is there, I assume there would be some process if the department felt like the report contents weren't responsive to the RFP, to engage in some request for refinement of the report. So that's a question to you. And second, a question to the director, whether, I'm not sure whether we asked you at the last meeting whether you were satisfied with the report, whether you thought that it was sufficiently responsive to what we put out in the RFP.
Yeah, so I'm not that acquainted with the slalom agreement specifically. I would say that at this point, we would probably have to go to the terms of the contract that I assume we entered into with Slalom for its work and determine whether they met the terms of that agreement. I'm not familiar with that agreement specifically. And so I don't know if you want to answer any further questions.
Yeah, so the contract's been paid, so there's 3 installment payments, so they've been paid, so it have to be a clawback. But as far as the success of the report, I think the report did what it was intended to do. It met the scope of the RFP that was issued, from which Salem was selected, and the components of the RFP are certainly incorporated into the business case. People may not agree with the information that's in the business case, or they want something different, but it does meet the scope. And I think also one important component of the business case for those who've gone through and have read it, it's one common point of reference for everyone regarding the development of an open source voting system in San Francisco. There's so much comment and concern and hopes and wishes regarding the development of a voting system, but there's nothing that's really refined and in one place other than this business case. So I think it's a good starting point, not just for the concept of building an open source voting system, but also for the city to have in relation to what to do to build an open source voting system. So.
Okay.
So, I
Yes.
have a couple of, do you have
Please.
Okay. So, I first would love if Commissioner Hill can, introduce herself a little bit and let the rest of the commission know a little bit about yourself. And then another thing is maybe Secretary Chan, if you can provide us, if it's very similar to maybe my appointment, but what the Commissioner Savant's kind of like to fill her commission seat, what the process will look like, or let other commissioners know. I'm pretty determined to getting this to be a full commission. As you could tell, I was like determined to get the Board of Education one on the agenda. And so I do want to be able to do that. And then also we should really talk about the BOPEC committee as well, because we do need to fill in those seats.
Yes, we
so
do.
those are kind of the three things that I do want to go, but I would love it if Commissioner Hill can start with a quick introduction and welcome.
Sure, thank you. I should have thought to do that. Charlotte Hill, it's lovely to meet all of you in person. I was born and raised in Northern California, have lived in San Francisco since 2011. I am currently a PhD student at UC Berkeley, studying, among other things, how to build public trust in government. And as I'm sure you can imagine, voting systems and elections more generally play a large role in how people think about government. They are kind of the key, sometimes the most obvious interface between the public and government. So I'm very excited to apply some of the things that I have learned and am continuing to learn in the academic world to this work, to this commission. I also have been actively involved in nonpartisan political reform organizations for the past decade, including Represent Us and Fair Vote, both of which try to pass electoral reforms that build public trust in government and a closer relationship between voters and their elected officials. When I was speaking before the Board of Education in an effort to be appointed to this commission, I focused a lot on equity and the need for greater equity in our elections here in San Francisco, looking at turnout discrepancies between neighborhoods like Bayview Hunters Point and kind of the upper market Eureka Valley area, which tends to have some of the highest turnout in the city. So in the 2016 primary, for instance, turnout ranged from a low of 40% in Bayview Hunters Point to a high of around 70% in the upper market Eureka Valley area. So my personal interests really revolve around equity and turnout and participation, and how we can do even better to reduce that discrepancy. So I'm very interested to understand better what our outreach efforts currently look like, what opportunities might exist for us to reach people and help them understand the importance of voting, ways that they can easily vote through our vote by mail system, what the stakes are, and just overall increased participation. I'd say that's a bit about me, and I'm looking forward to getting to know you all better over the next 5 years.
Excellent. Thanks, Commissioner Hill. Commissioner Mogi, did you want to say anything else about the treasurer? What actions you were going to do? Or
I asked Secretary Chan if he can.
Commissioner Mogi, there's nothing really I can tell you about the process, because I don't know what the process is. It seems to be different for each appointing authority. You came through your own process with the DA, and they swore you in there. The Board of Ed did not follow a similar process. I was in touch with the Treasurer's Office. They had asked for Commissioner Safant's email address, other contact information. I gave that to them. I guess they're attempting to get in touch with her to clear up anything. They did receive her resignation letter, and at this point, that's all I know. But it seems that they're aware that there's a vacancy, that their appointee is no longer here. So I guess their next step is in their ballpark.
Yeah, so just two quick things. So for seats that are appointed by a single official, such as the district attorney or mayor, there is no subsequent board confirmation process or any of that stuff. So it really is just the decision of the elected official in question. And the person holding the seat appointed by the treasurer is required under the charter to have a background in financial management. So that would be the relevant qualification for that seat.
Very good.
I have a question, Commissioner Hill. So you mentioned earlier on, or first, welcome to the commission. Excited to have you. How many high schools are in San Francisco? Do you know offhand?
I don't know that number offhand.
Be curious. Director Ernst, do you know?
No, not public high schools. I think we have maybe a dozen.
If you include independent.
Yeah, the parochials and private schools, then yeah, but just public schools, it's probably a little over a dozen.
Why do you ask?
Well, I just was curious if it was on the order that maybe, if we each took a couple, would we be able to like visit each one or something as a group? But
Yeah, I just counted up. It looks like there are 17. That certainly seems doable. I would want to think through, what would the purpose be? What are we hoping to get out of this? Certainly the pre-registration program has already, I think, been quite a success. But if there are opportunities for us to get even more, high school students on the rolls and understanding the voting process here in San Francisco could be really interesting. Possibly, trainings for ranked choice voting and the like. But I'm happy to. I'm trying to think about what the next step would be. I'd like to reach out to members of the Board of Education who expressed an interest in us taking more of a role and understand what they were thinking, and also connect more with the director to understand what our current efforts look like. And I could do that and then report back at a future meeting. Yeah.
Great. That'd be great. Anything else, Commissioner Mogi? Very good. The only item I would like to bring this group is that, yes, we have a dysfunctional BOPEC committee, meaning that I am the only member. Well, that doesn't mean I'm dysfunctional. That's not what I'm saying. Anyway, but we have there's not a possibility of quorum. So I am asking for volunteers for that.
Could you speak a bit more about
Certainly.
that effort?
So the budget, I don't remember what the letters stand for now. Budget operations.
oversight of public elections.
Thank you. Oversight of Public Elections Committee. It is a subcommittee that has a standing meeting the first week of the month, which we will cancel if there is not anything significant for that group to hear. Generally, it is there to review budget and make a recommendation to this commission, budget as well as for an election plan. We do call BOPEC meetings where there are other things that, and particularly around open source voting, we've had a couple of meetings to look at what, in some more detail and make recommendations to the main body. So it is essentially a referral body and one to go into more details in those areas.
And then historically, it's met on the average of how many times a year, would you say?
3 to 4.
So,
Right?
if I weren't reappointed to be the chair of TAC, I would have gladly. But
Thank you, Commissioner Chudonic.
So I think we did have this deal as like when I finished school, which I just did like a couple days ago, I would consider doing it, but I would love to see if anyone else would like to join the committee first before I would do that.
I'm interested in joining. I'm also wary of overcommitting, given that I'm new and have yet to, get a full grasp of what the commitment of just being on the broader committee looks like. But it sounds like it's not a huge time commitment. Do you have an estimate of approximately how much time you spend both in and outside those meetings?
I would say that particularly for like the budget one, it might be 4 to 6 hours if you really want to get into detail into the budget. For the election plan, yeah, something similar. So depending on how many elections there are a year, you can look at that. In terms of the ones on open source, there wasn't a lot of prep. It was more a matter of understanding what was going on with the project and how it was proceeding. I'm trying to think if I actually spend that much time. I would say four is usually the number of hours it would take to fully prep for those meetings in those cases.
And how many people would ideally be serving on this committee?
There are 3 seats on that committee.
And how long are the terms?
It is, there's no
term.
specific term other than you have to be a commissioner. So it can be, what I'd like to do is have this kind of rotate. I've been on it for about a year. I will stay through this next, through the summer. But I think a rotation is appropriate. So I would say a year at a time.
Commissioner Jung, are you at all interested?
I would have to talk over that with my 16-month-old daughter before I commit to that position.
So can I ask, is there a BOPEC meeting next month?
We do not have one in June. Excuse me, I do not anticipate one in June. However, not having committee members makes it impossible to have one if one were necessary. So I'm looking for at least one volunteer so that we can have quorum.
I'll volunteer through the end of this year.
Thank you, Commissioner Jung.
As until June fiscal year, or is this a calendar year? I just want to make sure.
No,
that
I'm talking about the common parlance of the UC year, the calendar year through December 31, 2018.
I feel like I'm on a roll. Can I get a second volunteer?
More than welcome to.
I certainly would, if you've been anticipating doing this
No,
post
it was
NPP.
just asked. The only decision was
All right.
I asked if I can finish school first, and then now that it's here,
Got it.
but
When do you finish school?
I just did.
Oh,
Yeah. So I just graduated, but it's fine. I would love to like relax a little, but it's also okay that, you know, if you would like to jump in.
If you're open to it, I think this might be something that I would be better suited to do after having served on the commission for a little while.
Okay, then I will then join for this year.
Thank you, Commissioner Rogi. So we have our BOPEC committee again. Appreciate that, and we will probably. Again, I do not anticipate one for June. I do in July. However, I noticed that the first Wednesday, is, of course, a holiday. So, though I think that reviewing the election results is something that we have done in the past, so I will look potentially to schedule it for the week after. Thank you very much. Public comment on this item?
Thank you, Commissioners. David Carey here. I'd like to comment on 3 things. First, just briefly on the question that Commissioner Jung raised about about the contract for the Stalin report, and that is that I have found that there are some topics that were required in the RFP and in the contract that were not covered in the report. 2 that come to mind right now are total cost of ownership and issues about possible patent issues that we'd have to avoid infringing on. I'm not sure that those issues are things that are of most concern for people, but I think there is some concern about to what extent the report covered everything that was mentioned in the contract and the RFP.
I mean, but what would you get out of that? Let's say we engaged in some kind of clawback process and said, you Slalom didn't answer the question about total cost of ownership and about patent issues. I mean, what would going back into that, how would that help address the concerns that you raised about the report?
So again, I think the key thing are, I've mentioned where some of my key concerns were. I'll note that Department of Technology head Linda Grell mentioned the issue of cost of ownership, that it was an issue that total cost of ownership was an issue that she was concerned about in terms of moving forward with this. And it is something that is, has to be part of some of the long-term design trade-off about, what's the trade-off between doing development now versus having, ending up with exceptionally large operational costs later on, that sort of thing. So I think I'm, not having a lot of faith in the estimates that they came up with. I'm not sure that, I think that would have to be addressed before you really had much faith in making much progress on total cost of ownership. But it was a topic that was in the contract and not covered. On the issue of participation in the BOPEC committee, I'd just like to point out that being on that BOPEC committee is a great opportunity to work your way into being the chair of the BOPEC committee, which is a great opportunity to work your way into, learning how to preside over public meetings and that sort of thing, which prepares you for being a president of this commission, which is something that I hope most people would think seriously about doing. And the third thing I'd like to just briefly mention is I encourage all of the commissioners in this coming June election to make some time to do some election observation. To get familiar with more with kind of what the operations of running an election is like. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Carey.
Brent Turner with California Association of Voting Officials. I also wanted to, again, associate Cavo with the comments of Mr. Carey. As many of you know, we are endorsed by the National Organization of Women, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and many other groups. I would encourage the commission, again, to look further into that clawback issue, certainly the cost of ownership issue, as well as just the superficial style of the report in total. Also, again, recognize that the only two people that have ever successfully designed and deployed or demonstrated an open source voting system met with Slalom before the process started in the Department of Elections and had conversation where both parties, Dr. Juan Gilbert and Brian Fox, said they were glad to help pro bono out of duty to country Slalom get their report together. Neither of them were ever contacted again, and we asked Slalom if they had any open source experience, which they said no. So we were expecting to be available assets to Slalom for no charge and never were contacted. And we went through the whole issue of OSET and the issues surrounding the Texas project as well as the LA project and laid it all out for them very clearly from the two most knowledgeable experts in the field, and were completely ignored. So there are no excuses. They should give the money back. Thank you.
Yeah, just in response to the last couple of commenters, I mean, I do agree that there is a sense of deja vu here. I mean, thinking back to when the mayor's office first wanted to have this this planning phase, I mean, what I remember is that coming up with the cost was like one of the primary things. And now to hear today that, we need to hire someone to find out how much it costs is really, it's kind of frustrating. So, I mean, I agree that, I mean, I feel like something should be done. I'm just not sure, what. I mean, the other concern I have too is that if this project is moved to another department, how are we going to continue to be able to have our oversight role? And so, I mean, these are for future meetings, but this is kind of what's going through my mind right now.
Other comments, commissioners?
And Commissioner Jordanik, you've had an opportunity to review the slalom report. Two questions. One, what was your impression of the work product? And second, did it meet, was it responsive to what was called for and contracted for in the RFP? And if yes, is it perhaps an issue with the RFP?
Well, I was really hoping to see something come out that was a lot more kind of creative in the way that they approached the problem. And what I saw was something a very traditional, what's called a waterfall style of development. And, in our own first resolution back in 2015, we were advocating for an agile approach. So, the consultants will say that what they're describing is agile, but from my read and in my experience in software, it's not an agile approach. So, that's one of the things that disappointed me. I think the cost estimates, I think, are very high. I think some of, just for example, the reporting component, they were saying it would cost between $1 and $2 million. And I think that that's something that, a single developer could do in a few months. So maybe on the order of $200,000 or $300,000 or something. So I think that, the costs are very high. I mean, the ranges, even within their own numbers, are extremely wide ranges. And how can these be useful? They gave 6 different ranges, and the range they're recommending was between 12 and 28 million. That's more than a double window. So, and then the specificity of the next steps is not enough to really, no one really knows what to do. I think if the report were successful, there would be people would have a much clearer idea of what they need to do. So it's kind of a bird's eye view of my.
I have to say, I tend to agree with everything that you said, and that the report was pretty disappointing. I mean, I know some of you here just graduated with degrees in public policy, and I would not say this is an A paper, but I don't know enough to know whether it was an issue with the RFP or the expectations were not sufficiently described. But I sure was disappointed in this report.
Yeah, and like Carl said, and the technical advisory committee will at least be going through page by page to point out specific things, and I think we will have some kind of an executive summary, I think.
I mean, it's almost like this report was run through a management consultant widget, and this is something like, I mean, I don't want to cast aspersions, and I'm going to withhold judgment until TAC has an opportunity to go through it in more detail. But I have to admit that while perhaps improvident, some of the comments from the public about clawing back did resonate with me.
But I mean, having said that, there's no matter what the report says, there's nothing stopping the city from moving forward, and there is a political will issue.
Let me ask a question here, and I think this goes beyond the jurisdiction of this commission. I mean, you Commissioner Jordanik have been spending years on this project, as have many members of this audience. I wonder, here we're in a sense all speaking to the choir. I'm not a software developer, and but no one in the department is. And you've met with political leaders and with potential grant makers. I wonder if we're approaching this the wrong way. I mean, if you really think that one developer with $5 million can develop something that you think is adequate, why not start there? Get a grantor to fund it, spend your time on that, and then run it by the authorities to make comment on.
Well, for starters, I never said that one person could do it for $5 million, but I mean, I think it's easier than what they described. But yeah, I think if a philanthropist were to fund this project, that would be great. And I don't know many philanthropists, but I'm trying to find them. But there's also issues, like even if a philanthropist were to fund a project, how do we know that what they build is something that San Francisco could use? So they want to have a customer. So maybe San Francisco has to express enough interest to like entice people to give. So that's one aspect.
I mean, but who is San Francisco? San Francisco is not one person. It's not even a single corporate entity that's governed by one body, right? So there are different constituents that are San Francisco. Why not get it started and just present it to the city? And isn't it easier to kind of make comment and to correct than to try to get buy-in ex ante? And go through the usual difficulties that any big project has in government contracting? Well,
I think we should pursue all avenues. But the thing is, if a philanthropist doesn't step forward, then I think, some funders I've spoken with say this is a project that the government should fund. And then San Francisco leaders say that the federal government should fund this or the state should fund this. Secretary of State Padilla says the counties need to fund this. It's like everyone, this is kind of what leadership is about. And this is what I expressed during the budget committee hearing, that ultimately someone needs to, lead. And I think the body that we as a commission have the most power over is the San Francisco government. We don't oversee philanthropists, so we could try to get them to do it, but there's no guarantee.
But we don't oversee the San Francisco government. Our charge is very, very limited. It's one thing to kind of use adjectives and adverbs to describe how we're ultimately accountable, but that's not what the law doesn't give us that power.
Well, we oversee the department, and but I don't think. Okay. Well,
in any case, I would say to Commissioner Jung's, I guess I would offer and maybe extend that to just say I would welcome TAC going beyond what it's done so far. Look at the slalom report and come up with perhaps some creative ways to move this forward more quickly. And I'm sure that's something you've thought about, Commissioner Jordanek, but I think that given members of the public, given that TAC is part of the Election Commission, given the expertise there and how deeply you guys have dug into it already, that it might be, I would hope that this would go beyond an evaluation of the Solemn Report and taking it to the next stage to try and help push this forward. So, Commissioners, any other comments on the Commissioners' reports? All right. Let's see, we already had public comment. So, Secretary Chen, next item, please.
Item 7, Director's Report. Director's Report on topics not covered by another item on this agenda. That's not right.
Yeah. So I'll take questions on my report, just a few comments. One, I didn't note that Commissioner Donaldson also spoke at the Budget Subcommittee meeting last Thursday. I referenced Commissioner Jordanek, but I did not reference Commissioner Donaldson. And then also, we do need poll workers still, so while we're considering developing voting systems, if we can go out there and recruit those that we know to work at the polls, that'd be greatly appreciated. We need probably like around 300, 400 more clerks for this election. So we've been contacting the media. We've had several interviews today, English and non-English media. So, but that's my report. I'll take any questions.
So are we behind where we normally would be at this point?
We are, because the school year changed. That they're ending earlier, if I understand correctly. So the
June 6th is the last day.
it's earlier than usual, or before, or is it later?
It's a little bit later. Last year was like right during Memorial Day, but this time
Okay.
it's June 6th, so it's actually probably the day before school ends, so it's probably a weird
Right.
time.
That's exactly it. So normally, because one of the programs, we actually have a very good program with the high schools for high school students to work at the polls as clerks. And because of the ending of the school year and the graduation falling right around Election Day, commencement ceremony practices and ceremonies during that time, we have less high school students who are working at the polls this election than previous elections. So we're trying to make up that difference now with non-high school students.
What are you doing? Public information campaign? How are you?
Yeah, a lot of we do what works well is emails to voters. So we've actually used the emails we have on account with the voters provide to us. Not everyone provides an email. Then also we did purchase an email list from CBS Radio to contact voters in specific areas of the city who had language skills, bilingual language skills. Also a lot of media. We contact a lot of media, the English and also the Filipino, was, even though it's in English, with the Spanish and the Chinese media. We put a lot of effort in having articles put out. We've had several TV stories run the past week or so, several newspaper articles that have been run. And then we have tomorrow, or Friday, we'll be on Singtel Radio. It's a big draw for Chinatown in District 4. So, yeah, a lot of media work and direct emails. That's probably the most effective way for us to reach folks, to get them to, if they don't want to be poll workers, then to tell other people they know to think about being a poll worker.
I was going to sit this one out, but I'll sign up.
Yeah, appreciate
Yes.
it. Yeah.
Also, I'll probably sign up myself to join.
Probably.
I will sign up for this election. I do want to know, I know I brought this up last meeting, maybe it is true, but on your website, it is $3 short for high school students.
Yeah. So
can you fix?
Sorry,
okay.
let me interrupt you.
Yeah.
So the high school students, they don't have to stay until everything is reconciled at the polling place. They leave earlier, and that's why there's a bit of a difference. And I'd forgotten that. I don't know why it's $3. That's a legacy from some forgotten time. I don't know where that came from, but that's the reason why there's a difference.
Got it.
So,
Okay.
so did you want to?
I was just going to bring up the
Why don't you
email
do
from, yeah. So also, I don't think it's made it in your report because I was just made aware of this today, that we got an email from a member of the public who had received 2 ballots and got your explanation back, Director Arntz, that was due to the fact that they there'd been an alteration. Though it was the same, I guess, street address, but some addition, like an apartment A kind of a situation, addition to the address for the purposes of their DMV record, which resulted in having ultimately 2 registration records for the same person. Which is, I get the explanation, but that's problematic if it's, you have to renew your license every 5 years. That's 20% of San Francisco's population, so potentially, let's say, half of them is about what we get for vote by mail. So potentially 50% would have, could get an extra ballot. I don't know if that would also affect voter rolls, but same would apply. And then, up to 20% of people could have two entries. So what are your thoughts, comments on that?
Yeah, so Stephen Hill is the person that you're referencing. And
Yes.
so Stephen, after we mailed the first ballot, he's a permanent vote by mail voter. So we dropped those in the post office the beginning of this month. And so after the drop of the initial permanent vote by mail voter, Stephen Hill changed his address to include a more specific reference to where his mail should be dropped off at his residence. So this is at DMV. He made this change, and so the process actually worked correctly. So the motor voter, works that if someone changes a residential address or a mailing address after an initial ballot has been mailed, then the information is set to the statewide registration database called VoteCal, and then the statewide registration database will inform a county that there's been a change in the DMV information, and if a ballot has been sent already before the change in address, then the county will issue a second ballot. So Stephen Hill actually, him receiving 2 ballots is actually the way the process is supposed to work. So no, everyone changing an address every 5 years would not cause them to get a second ballot. They would get a second ballot if they change their address after the initial mailing of the permanent vote by mail ballots. And in an instance where, like where Stephen didn't change his physical location, he has the same ballot type. So whatever ballot he voted would be the same contest. So whatever ballot, he could vote both ballots, send them back to us. We only process and count 1 ballot. We would challenge the second ballot because every ballot goes through a verification process. So the process worked appropriately. There was nothing wrong. He could vote one, send it to us, recycle the other. Or if someone forgot they voted the first one, if Stephen forgot he voted 1 ballot and Stephen Hill wanted to send us a second ballot, we would count one of Stephen Hill's ballots and recycle the other one ourselves after the election.
If it wasn't vote by mail and was on the rosters, would there be 2 entries?
No, there'd be 1
What
entry
would
because the
prevent that?
rosters aren't printed until about a week before Election Day.
So that would have been reconciled in some
Correct.
fashion.
Right.
Okay.
And if there's a change after Election Day, we do a late but eligible list that we send out to the polling places. So.
Okay, thank you.
If someone were to submit 2 vote by mail ballots and have different votes, discrepancies between those ballots, do you have a process for how you would determine which ballot to count?
We count the first one that we receive is how we do it. However, in an instance where we issue a second ballot, we'll hold on to the first one, but waiting for the second one to come if it's a different ballot type. So let's say if Stephen Hill had moved from District 4 to District 1, we would have waited until the end of the process to see if the District 1 ballot arrived. If it does not arrive, we actually go back and pull the District 4 ballot, and then we'll have to do a remake on that, and we apply the contest for which he's eligible on a different set of ballots that we then process. So.
Thank you.
So in this case, did he have to opt into something at the DMV, or is this automatically?
It's automatic now. So if there's a change in your residential address in relation to your ID, then the DMV, unless you opt out, the DMV will push that information to the Secretary of State's office.
And then the other question I have is how is the system able to link it back to his original registration, given that there were, some differences between the information? Is that an automated process, or?
So DMV does not. Our records do. So we have a transaction log for all the voters. So every time someone were to change a residential address, we have that in a previous transaction log.
Is there like a manual step where you search the voter to find out where the previous entry was to link them? Or?
We know this. So when it runs through, so the system will tell us which ballot we have, and in the instance where it's a different ballot type too, I forgot to say we actually will pre-challenge those ballots, and then we'll actually wait for that second ballot to show up with the correct ballot type. And then if we don't receive it, then we actually go back and review the records and see if we have any pre-challenges, then we'll pull those ballots and do a remake to make sure that if we get the ballot type content transferred onto cards that we can then run through the system and allocate vote to the voter.
So actually what I was asking about was even before the ballot, just the registration record itself. Like if DMV sends you new information, do you already know that that's linked to an existing voter registration record, or do you have to search for existing voters to find out which one that matches to?
No, so the statewide database connects all the county's registration databases essentially and pools the data. So DMV pushes into that pool. And so that's what's doing the referencing for the voters' information. Then SOS pushes that record into the appropriate county's pool.
So it's updating an existing record?
Correct.
Okay, I see.
There's a level of I forget the term, a level of verification where if there's a doubt that the record might belong to a voter or may belong to a voter, then the SOS, the vote cal, sends the record to the county, and the county then has to review the information to determine if it's the same voter or not. But if there's a high likelihood of a match, then DMV would just push the information and update the record to the counties.
Mm-hmm.
And then with license numbers, it's a high likelihood of a match. So most of those coming from DMV would be validated at Secretary of State's office and then pushed into the counties. So.
Okay. So I had one other question, and so there's been a couple, this is also coming from a member of the public, actually, Stephen, and so there's been some pieces in the Chronicle and editorial or columns that sort of, it's a little bit frustrating, but it's sort of kind of building this trying to make the case that ranked choice voting is, confusing voters, and it's the candidates are not, using it correctly, or it's like a scheme and things along these lines. So actually, I might want to mention something for future meetings related to this, but he was wondering, the types of ranked choice voting education that the department is doing right now. I know the mayor's race isn't normally expected, but is the department doing less than they normally would because it wasn't planned, or?
No, we're not. Because ranked choice is on the ballot, we still have it in the voter guide. It's in our notices. We do interviews. I did an interview yesterday. It was on Channel 2 on ranked choice. It's part of press releases that we put out. It's on our website. We have a video. And then if there's, like now you're mentioning this, we'll probably pick up doing press releases and start pushing out a bit more. But we haven't done less than we've done in the past as far as education is concerned.
Okay. And then are there still like bus signs on how to vote? Or
the bus signs, the bus signs more on the registration and getting out the vote than it is on the ranked choice voting this time around, yeah.
Has the Department of Elections done any social media promotion of ranked choice voting?
No.
Things like Facebook ads, Twitter posts, sponsored Twitter posts?
No, we haven't really done any social media specifically on ranked choice. Usually we do more traditional media. We have a bigger reach that way, actually, but we can certainly, we have a video, we can provide the link, and we do that occasionally, but we haven't done it this week because voting's been going on for a week essentially. But certainly we can do some Facebooking and tweeting with ranked choice voting in mind.
The reason I ask, and I'm specifically interested in Facebook, is because you can target advertisements pretty specifically, even to specific neighborhoods in San Francisco. So thinking beyond ranked choice voting, as we're thinking about trying to drive turnout in historically low turnout neighborhoods, it might be interesting to target some advertisements to potential voters in those neighborhoods.
One more thing related to this. In one of the articles, you were quoted as saying that, we're saving a citywide runoff can cost around $3.5 million. Is that right? And so the city is saving all this money, but I think I know the answer to this question, but does that mean that the department has been able to benefit from that and use some of that extra savings towards
No.
More education? Yeah.
No, we don't get the extra 3.5.
Or even a fraction of that?
No, I don't. No.
No bounty?
No, there's no reward. Yeah.
Yeah,
No.
okay. So, but it's just more for the record. I think, the city's saving all this money, but we're not taking some of that and putting it into education, which I wish we were, but.
Very good point. Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments or questions from the commissioners on the director's report? No? Any public comment? Seeing none?
No, there is.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, just very briefly, Brent Turner with Cavo. Just so the commission is aware, there's a conversation now regarding term limits for directors of Department of Elections. Perhaps at some point the commission may want to weigh in on that issue. Thank you.
Mr. Turner, could you explain more what you mean by that?
We're noting a statewide phenomenon where some directors of Department of Elections that are either elected or appointed, tend to stay for a very long time due to the association with the California Association of Clerks and Election Officials and the current batch of vendors and proprietary interests. The thought is that there may be a movement toward term limits for directors of elections so that you don't get that ingrained interest effect within the government.
You mean like state legislation, you mean?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Seeing none, next item?
Item 8, agenda items for future meetings. Discussion and possible action regarding items for future agendas.
So I have an item to invite CIO Jurel to the next commission meeting. Other items?
Yeah, so this is just, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I just wanted to maybe express it as a possibility. Given these columns and pieces that are appearing about ranked choice voting, we've been using it for a long time. And one of my concerns is that, after the election, if some of these papers are trying to kind of undermine, the system that we use, I think it might be, we could consider maybe publishing a piece just describing, the benefits it has and some of the history and maybe even how our system will be improving with this interim system. And just to kind of, provide a more balanced or kind of an objective perspective on some of this stuff.
So is that a suggestion for a?
Possibly after the election, but kind of depends on how things go or what.
How would you frame that then? That would be an RCV outreach, some sort of RCV outreach discussion as a commission item?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
I'd like to note
we could talk about it before.
Offline, sure.
I'd like to note on this point that the city of Santa Fe did something like this recently after their successful first use of ranked choice voting. So perhaps looking at, what they were preparing ahead of time, what types of data they were trying to gather or whatnot, could be helpful.
Yeah, and actually, Director Ernst, you may want to mention this, but so we're going to be changing to the system that Santa Fe used for their election, and I had a chance to see their sample ballot, which is much nicer than what we're using now. And Director Ernst, you were saying at one point to me that there's going to be a pilot demonstration of the new layout? Or
Yeah, so ideally, we'll have what's called a pilot program in mid to late July for the next, the voting system in relation to the RFP that the department issued in February. So the precinct and the central scanning equipment will be available for people to mark the ballots and see how it operates. Also the accessible equipment, and include a ranked choice voting card that the Dominion provides with this system. And the current ranked choice card provides 3 selections, and the next system will provide, I think it's 10. It's either 8 or 10, and it'll be a bubbled base grid approach. And that's something too when it comes to ranked choice that require a lot of outreach, because it'll be such a drastic change just in the appearance of the ballot card. And then also the approach of how to mark that card no longer will be the connecting of the arrow, but a filling in of the bubble. And something that simple can really trip up a lot of people, So you have to, when it comes to the outreach, it has to really get down to that level. So the pilot program, and to link back to what Commissioner Juranek is stating, will be the first public opportunity to get a sense of what this system offers in relation to ranked choice voting. So,
Other items? None? Public comment?
sorry.
Thank you, Commissioners. David Carey here. I have actually a list of 6 items that I'll suggest. They're all related to the open source voting system project, and they are all things I would recommend that you schedule as separate agenda items rather than combining them into your standing agenda item on the subject. The first 2 relate to doing some reviews of things, recognizing that we're finishing up the second full fiscal year of funded development of the open source voting system, and particularly with the issuance of the slalom report, it might be kind of good to kind of take a look at where things are and where you want to be going forward. So the first one is doing a milestone review of your policy, the one that was adopted in December 2015. To clarify and possibly revise, supplement, and or reaffirm your policy. See if you've learned anything in the last 2.5 years that should be better reflected in that policy. Certainly we've seen some instances where people want to add on, rewrite that policy in effect in terms of some of the activities that are happening. And this would be a chance for you to say, this what we had was what we still want, or we want something else. Second one is a milestone of the overall review, milestone review of the overall progress towards implementing that policy. The third is to hold a post-mortem discussion on the slalom report and the latest COIT request. And I'd encourage you to invite the architects and directors of the slalom report, including John Arndt, Linda Gurel, and a responsible party from the mayor's office, and also invite slalom to that discussion. The fourth item is develop project and commission performance objectives for implementing the open source voting system policy in this coming fiscal year. These are project and commission objectives, not employee performance objectives, so they can be discussed and developed in open hearings. It's keeping in mind particularly that there are a burgeoning number of players, including the OSVTAC group that are involved in this. The fifth one is to identify legal barriers you are facing that prevent an effective and timely development of the open source voting system, especially any limitations that might be lifted by a charter amendment that is put on the November ballot. So if you feel like there are things that are maybe in the spirit of your what your job is in the charter, look and see if for this specific case there's something you'd want to do. And very quickly, the last one is get a seat on COIT for a representative of the Elections Commission. You deserve to be a more active and well-informed participant in that critical decision-making rather than being an outsider encroaching on other departmental IT resources. Thank you.
Mr. Carey?
Hey, Mr. Carey.
Oh, sorry. The charter amendment idea, is there some area you had in mind around that, or is that just?
Actually, there are several things, but one is the charter amendment kind of sets you out as supposedly an independent body that is supposed to provide a buffer between you and the Department of Elections and elected officials. And particularly, I think historically the issue has been encroachment from the mayor's office on the Department of Elections. And I'm seeing that happen with the open source voting system right now in ways that are probably not helpful. And so empowering you to do some things that maybe you're not able to do right now would be one thing. For example, the charter amendment specifically allows you to hire 2 employees, the director and your secretary. Would it be helpful if it empowered you to hire project manager for the open source voting system? Would it be helpful if it provided you with your own funding stream for the open source voting system, rather than having to depend on mayoral discretion to limit what that's doing? And I don't know right now whether legally you can hire a third person or not. That might be a question you want to ask the city attorney now or at some point. But those are some of the things that, and certainly we've seen with the California Clean Money campaign that you have people who are politically active out in the public who can kind of help move some of these issues forward for you. If there was information about what might be helpful and what you see as maybe might be some of your needs.
Okay, thanks.
I was
doing some work on the San Francisco election for my consulting work. I'm looking at sample ballots, and I noticed the department has a new online accessible ballot, which I thought was very good. I was curious about it, so I opened up the hood to look inside because I'm a techie, and I noticed it's provided by a third-party service called OmniBallot, and they use a third-party Google Analytics web tracker. So it actually embeds JavaScript into the sample ballot inside your browser. And I've been in battles before with a privacy issue of third-party tracking services because they have the ability to identify people individually, not just aggregated statistics. So companies like Google and a few other people offer these services to companies that operate websites to provide them an easy way to get statistics. But then, of course, Google knows everything. And it's also a security issue because they're including JavaScript along with code. So like the sample ballot, you can make selections. So even though they probably wouldn't do this, they have the technical ability to monitor your actual choices. So I think it might be nice for the commission to put on the agenda item a discussion about privacy policy, whether the commission would recommend against using a third-party tracking service, which means you just have to use statistics from the source web servers. And that would be more anonymous and less detailed than what you get. But then, especially in regards to vote tampering and security and privacy in general, my recommendation is that the commission would adopt a privacy policy that would not allow third-party tracking services. So I think that's just my suggestion for a future agenda item.
Mr. Haig, do you know why the tracking's on there, or Director Arntz, why this is on that site in the first place?
No, for the sample ballot, I don't know. For the remote accessible ballot, there is a tracker. That's how the vendor actually counts the number of people that have used the service as part of its certification with Secretary of State's office. The Secretary of State's office, after your election, requires a report indicating the number of people that have requested their remote accessible ballot. For the sample ballot, no, I don't know why there would be this JavaScript. So I can't. That one I can't.
But
explain.
it is the same tracker for both the sample.
I
and
don't
the-
know. You have to speak.
So I can kind of tell you the answer to that. I mean, it's part of the marketing for these tracking services is they just advertise to site developers to say, here's a great tool. You have a great tool. It's a great service. You get all this data. You can make all your decisions and all of that. But of course, they're not pointing out the cost in terms of privacy with respect to the public, and also a matter of security. So when we talk about sensitive software, certainly having unknown third-party scripting services presents a danger. And so I only had access to the online sample ballot, so I have no idea whether the official remote accessible vote by mail has that same issue. But I mean, it wouldn't surprise me, and it wouldn't surprise me that the certification office at the Secretary of State might not notice that. So,
Can you anticipate whether there is an easy fix in regards to the sample ballot, or
the easy
yeah?
fix is you eliminate it, and then all the servers have logs about how many times they were accessed. And so that would be an alternative to the third-party tracking service.
Yeah.
But then people have to run software or install software to analyze the logs. So that's a little bit extra cost compared to the free reports you get from the third-party tracking service.
Yeah, I also want to apologize, Mr. Haig, because I was supposed to bring this up during the director's report and I forgot. But yeah, this is something that Carl mentioned at the TAC meeting, and I passed this information along to Director Arntz. But the issue is that when a voter accesses the accessible sample ballot, there's this tracking URL which the vendor could potentially be using for other purposes, but we don't really know. So,
So there's also an issue with the city website. I think they also use third-party tracking services for that. And maybe for most of the city, that's not really an issue, but maybe elections are more sensitive than, other departments. So, that would also be a consideration, whether the general website should have third-party tracking services, but then for voting specific things like sample ballots or remote accessible vote by mail, that's much more sensitive and more security related.
Thank you. Okay, any more commissioners, any more comments on this? Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Turner.
It's okay. Thank you. Brent
Timer.
Turner, just a
Secretary.
final,
Timer.
public comment on this. I think we're pretty clear at this point that if possible, perhaps there should be, because of the calendar of the budget and the supervisors, maybe there can be an emergency session. I don't know if you can wait till the next month to pick up some of these issues. Maybe some thought of a press conference, something. We know that San Francisco does better than a lot of places in the United States on these issues, but, and not to cast aspersions or blame good Director Arnst, he's merely a victim of the system in this case. The vendor system with private interests trumping the interests of the public is actually the issue. The problem is that the vendor interests and the intellectual property interests are running smack dab into the national security interests in causing the conflict. So to get into particular points here, naturally when we talk about marked ballots and moving forward, you can't have the voters touching the ballots with a crayon or a pencil or a pen. It has to be dispensed properly from a printer so that you don't have those voter intent issues that are akin to an electronic hanging chad. You have to have a clean, proper ballot, a la the Deckert design that was conceptualized in 2000, so that when it prints out, the choices of the voter are very clear and that voter intent issue is eliminated. Regarding the mail-in issue, I would direct you again to Dr. Gilbert. Ohio is considering his open source mail-in ballot system. I think they're going to decide whether they're certifying that in Ohio this Friday. So next week you should be able to ascertain what happened there, but certainly we want to incorporate that. Regarding the database management systems, naturally, again, those have to be all open source. We can't have these vendors with their interests all over the security. Finally, maybe it would be good to talk about SB 450 as we see that coming up. They're definitely going to try to transition San Francisco toward voting centers. That's a vendor plan. This is concocted by vendors, so we want to avoid that. San Mateo's in the midst of that, and maybe get some historical.
We're at time, Mr. Turner.
We're at 7 seconds.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Maybe get some historical perspective on how we got into this mess and get the experts to come forward and mention how we get out of this mess expeditiously. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. I'll be interested to learn more about this Ohio system. Thank you for that information. Commissioners, any other public comments? Commissioners, any additional comments? All right. Secretary Chan, next item, please.
Item 9, objectives and processes for annual performance evaluation, Director of Elections. Discussion and possible action regarding the preparation of objectives and process for performance evaluation of the Director of Elections. A, public comment on all matters pertaining to this agenda item. B, vote on whether to meet in closed session. C, closed session. pursuant to the Sunshine Brown Act. D, discussion and vote pursuant to Sunshine Ordinance on whether to disclose any portion of the closed session. E, if closed session is held, reconvene in open session, report action taken in closed session.
Thank you, Secretary Chan. So I do not anticipate us needing a closed session. We put this in here in case that we felt it was necessary. And I have discussed this with Deputy City Attorney Chen. He didn't believe, did not believe that it was necessary to do so. However, we have that option. So this is a continuation of the work we've been doing to try and align with the rest of the city around the performance appraisal process. And so this document was the latest version they had. There was a memo since, and I got this from Donna Kotake from the HR department, that we should continue to use, absent new guidance, use what they had made available in 15-16 or 16-17, which is this document updated for 17-18. There's a question as to why this says 2017-2018, and that is because the idea here is that we actually have something that's prospective, though at this point we are, 10 months into this fiscal year. And the idea would be to catch this up in the next cycle. The content of this is based on the prior content that we had in our evaluation appraisal. So for now, I included that. I think the one addition is what we added there in terms of content, but now becomes part of the evaluation criteria, is the 3 policies that we have passed: paper balloting, open source voting, and voter awareness of accessible voting options. Other than that, I've also added in, I basically took the questions verbatim, but I've added in suggestion evaluation criteria to meet the SMART objectives of the performance goals, SMART being the reference here, the specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-framed. So I made an attempt at doing that. The suggestion would be that this becomes the objective, and I have used a time period suggested a time period, even though it doesn't correspond with the fiscal year, but giving us some time to apply these principles, that this would actually be, September would be the next review cycle. And then thereafter, I would suggest that we try and align then with the fiscal year, such that the following June would be the evaluation period. I've also provided this to Director Arntz for review in advance of the meeting, and I'd be interested in any comments from him as well. But let's start. And well, I guess Director Arntz, did you look at this? Do you have any comments or concerns?
No, this is fine. So this will end in September of this year then. So
that's the suggestion.
Okay, because I thought it was going to be from July to July.
We could move it back to that would correspond to the fiscal year if we wanted to do that. But I was kind of looking at the calendar, given the election and things like that, and thinking about that. And that this is the first time we did this, and I was suggesting it would be September. But we can move it so that this time it would correspond to the fiscal year.
No, it's fine, because we come back in September, and because most of what I wrote down, because I did create some objectives for myself, but they're more going forward into the next year.
Okay.
They wouldn't end necessarily in September, but they'd be ongoing. So if we came back in September, that'd be fine.
Okay.
With this.
So yes, I would like to get from you anything that you would like to add here that we know that you're working towards and incorporate it here, and understand they're ongoing, but then at each evaluation period, it would be progress towards those things. Okay. And yes, maybe it does make sense to actually finish this in June, and we could review it in July, and then we would be on basically the calendar, or the fiscal calendar. So take that into consideration. Commissioners?
June's a little, that'd be a challenging
Right.
time frame for me to
Right,
be
of
engaged
course.
in this.
And the certification for the election would be, what's the date for that?
Well, there's no set date. I have 30 days to process everything. So first week of July is the last, July 5th actually is the last day to certify. Hope to get it done by end of June. So no, I'm okay with the September 30th, and I'm okay with the format that you have.
Yeah.
And so I'm fine with that.
Okay. All right. Commissioners, questions, comments?
So I know I'm just saying this because I remember we had this discussion earlier, but like the 1 through 5 scale, there's kind of, I'm wondering if there's a way we could like make sure everyone has the same scale. Because, like, for example, average, is that average relative to, you know, what?
Right.
So I don't know what the answer is, but I know it's something we had discussed in the past.
Okay.
I have a fair amount of experience with these SMART goals, and I think it's tough to develop them. When I read through what's currently here, this all looks good, but it seems more like a job description, kind of broad. I'm excited to hear that the director has developed some goals for the year. I would like to see this move in the direction of specific time-framed goals. So in the next year, we would like to see X things accomplished. And I think that will help also with the rating scale, because it's a little easier to determine whether someone has done an excellent job at a very specific goal as opposed to kind of effectively implementing policies. The vaguer the goals are, the harder it is to evaluate someone's success at reaching them. I wish that were more actionable feedback. It might be that once we see your specific goals that you've developed for yourself and we incorporate them, we're a lot closer to kind of meeting the SMART part of this.
Sounds like we might, there's some more work to do on this. So I think that just to be clear, I think a couple of things is that this, again, carrying this over from prior years was one, it was a way of having some continuity, but also some content that had been considered carefully earlier. But yes, I think that, it could certainly benefit some more input. I'm fine if we want to refine this further and not, and not say this is final tonight. That was another reason for saying September, so we had a little time to make this transition. Commissioners, other comments?
I'm curious if any of us can articulate like maybe an example of a specific goal that we could include maybe along the lines you were suggesting. But
I could take a stab at this, and it might just be kind of reworking each of these to make sure that they're meeting kind of the specificity, measurability, et cetera, criteria. So for under elections, the point number 1 ensures free, fair, and functional elections with no or only non-material errors and deals effectively with anomalies. I could imagine turning that into something specific to the 2018 elections, maybe looking at past error rates or counts and setting a goal, where we would be cutting that number by some amount, and dealing effectively with anomalies. Again, I think kind of looking at past performance specifically in elections and saying, we thought that this went really well, let's replicate that, or we're concerned that we had X error rate and we'd like to see that be cut by some amount. So it's one example, pulling from what's written here.
Just my thought process in trying to take what we had before and make it somewhat measurable was to at least have some criteria that was, it's kind of binary, right? Election plan fully implemented and material adhered to. Mm-hmm. But there's something there that's measurable in that you could say probably yes or no to that if you examined it. Mm-hmm. That there are no legal findings for violation of law codes, deadlines, something that's verifiable. Those kinds of things. So that was the thought process behind what's here, though the extent to which we could get into these kinds of improvement areas, I think it would be admirable. It would also take a lot of effort. And also I think the one other thing is that when it comes to the commission and the relationship to the Department of Elections is that this is a policy body. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't set those kinds of things, but the city attorney, deputy city attorney probably would want to weigh in on whether that is at all crossing any lines Maybe you can comment on that, Deputy City Attorney Shen.
You mean in terms of being a little bit more precise about the goals?
Specific, yeah.
I mean, I think that's perfectly legitimate, if I understand Commissioner Hill's input.
Okay.
Yep.
Great.
So,
I'll go on the record and say I certainly don't want to micromanage. And there are the legal questions. There's also just, are we going to make life more difficult for the director than it needs to be? I think when I look at under elections, once again, point number 3 shows innovation and effectiveness in the elections process. I think there are opportunities for us as a group to be thinking through, what are we looking for in terms of innovation? What does success mean for us? That, yes, take some time to talk through, but I think will allow us to be more effective at measuring success and will help the Department of Elections have a better understanding of our vision for what elections would look like in the city. And I don't think that we necessarily then, I don't think that has to translate into creating extra work or again, micromanaging. It's just developing some clarity on our end about what exactly we mean for each of the things that are listed in here.
Maybe one suggestion for a way forward would be, rather than, if we can't convert every one of these goals into something that's, very specific and measurable, maybe as a middle ground, we could just take certain things we know we care about over the years and maybe just add a few that are very specific, the ones that we know enough about to articulate specific measurable things that could be measured, more easily. It might be a little bit more doable. But
Would the suggestion then be remove these and replace them with something else?
Well, either replace some or we could add some. It kind of depends on what they are. But if it's a case where it overlaps with something, we could. But I guess we would be in a better position if we actually had some of the specific ones in front of us. But maybe not tonight, though. I know.
Yeah, and personally, I would think that some of the commissioners would have something to say with respect to 2 sub 3 sub B open source voting. We identify that as effectively, under the category of whether the director effectively implements the commission's policies. But I would think you all would have a lot to say about what that means specifically.
Yeah. Another example that we've discussed is the issue of the number of vote by mail ballots that were disqualified. And we could have, one of the measures could be the percentage of ballots that were disqualified. That's very easy we know what those numbers are, and the department can influence those by their processes. So I'm sure there are other things like that. Maybe the number of complaints, during an election, or.
I think to follow up on what Commissioner Jung said about, the open source voting, and since I was fairly new, I think it was a little confusing for me, and I think this is what Commissioner Hill is saying about the criterias that we would be, the scale that we were looking at. So it's like from a communication perspective, we got the monthly reports, attack, was established. So if you think about it, it from one person's perspective, it could be that it was above average or even, so a 4 or above. But I think the overall was like, maybe we might have thought a little differently just because we all had our own set goals of what we wanted to look like at the end of the year, and that wasn't really conveyed, and it was a little confusing. So if we could be, especially on that item, be more specific, then maybe that would be a lot more helpful, so we can all have a similar kind of expectation at the end of the year.
So instead of, I don't want to get into something where we try and edit this here, of course. I think everybody would appreciate it if we did not. What I'd like to do is suggest, however, if then commissioners can email me their thoughts on this, and we'll refine this further and not accept this tonight. and take it up next month. And and Director Arntz, if I could get yours as well, and we could incorporate them. That would be my suggestion.
Would there be two separate ones, or would we be merging his suggestions in with ours?
I would see it as two sections, but yeah, in a single document. Yeah. If that's if everybody's okay with that, then we'll complete that. Any public comment?
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is David Carey. A couple things regarding the SMART objectives. I know that can be very challenging, and I'd say what you have now is far from being SMART. And I think my understanding is making that transition was maybe part of the motivation for going through this process. I'd suggest that you maybe reach out to Human Resources and see what, maybe having them come and develop a few, talk to you about where some opportunities are and how to develop some SMART objectives might be a useful way of doing it. They've clearly helped other departments and department heads deal with this, and so getting some input and maybe even consider a little bit of training on that as it applies in the very special case of the directors might be a resource you could use. I'd also suggest that if in the process that maybe you take the open source project out of the communication. I mean, just what do you have there? Effectively implements commission's policies. Really doesn't quite fit under communication in a way, just as an example. And also, when I've been involved with performance evaluations and this sort of thing, just doing an annual evaluation often isn't really considered enough. And particularly with the more dynamic open source project, that planning on doing maybe some quarterly consultations with the director, just kind of, here's how we think things are going based on the objectives that we set and what we're seeing so far in the performance, rather than waiting until the end of the year and saying, oh, here's what we see now. Finally, I'd like to suggest that when you do a new evaluation, that you give the public an opportunity to comment before you as commissioners have finally written up your evaluations. And last time you wrote up evaluations and you kind of pooled them and came to a conclusion, and it was kind of at that very end that you kind of got offered public comment opportunities. Thank you.
Additional public comment? And seeing no members of the public coming forward, commissioners, any other discussion?
I do tend to agree that that commission policy implementation portion should probably be put under Roman I elections rather than Roman II communication.
Are the Roman numeral headers, can we modify those too?
Yes, everything that's inside that box came out of the old evaluation, and the actual items I left the same. I added the italicized as a suggestion for the criteria for the evaluation, trying to make them SMART, apparently inadequately based on the feedback. But, you got to start someplace. Okay. Any other comments? The time is 8:33. I call this meeting adjourned.